This is Dave Fearon Sr. He of many years of teaching, of exploration into the world of organizational behavior, we might say development, authorship, co-authorship, and co-learningship and facilitation. Just the most recent emergence, I think, of the Dave Fearon that I've seen that I got to know was as a conversationalist and in the podcast domain, the video domain, and where we started to come together in the Nexus for Change Authors Jams as related to collaborative change library. So that intro to you, again, just generally as a conversationalist, is something I actually say, ooh, wow, what is my practice? Feels like that's what it is now. And so, given that there's a little bit about you in the room, and whoever's watching this probably knows a little bit about me, what would you like to say about yourself in this moment before we get on to whatever it is we're going to get on to?
I think the word conversationalist really does hit home, and I can swing my memory back into the few moments I started talking, which I think I remember. And from that point forward, it was, Dave, let someone else get a word in edge. So talking is one thing, but conversation is letting someone else get a word in edgewise. And once that word comes in, it influences the, our relationship, the flow, our willingness to keep listening and talking. So conversation, and then my son, by, I don't know, maybe by osmosis, when he just chose to work on his doctoral dissertation, chose talk, turns of talk, conversation. So it must be in the DNA. And so over the years of our podcast, now 289 episodes, about 20 or so of those are with Dave and me talking about particularly conversational analysis and how it helps people create meaning together, and even more than that, create a social architecture together in a conversation. Like you and I are now recreating the jam, your jam, and I'm just having a great time. And I have to tell you, Ryan, again, before we go, it takes a little more than just being able to listen to someone else and let them get a word in edgewise. It really does take an open heart as well as an open mind. And you provide that every time I've ever seen you. And your joy at what others are saying and doing is the key to the work that I've been doing. That is understanding the nature of practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's about that?
Oof. Wow. You immediately bring me into the moment of what I was doing to prepare for our conversation today. And I know that we have a common connection in Mr. Tennyson Wolf. And I know that you had been on Tennyson's show and
Yeah.
he was on your show and he was with me. So we have this interesting, and of course we're in the author jams together. And I was thinking, let me listen to how what the jam was like with Tennyson and Dave, and got to hearing that and getting into where that was in the terms of art, talking about art and artistry and hosting,
Yeah.
that leadership, and how are we talk you know me well enough to know that I have these little allergies to leader and manager and this kind of stuff that I talk about authority. So a person who holds authority and sponsors a space, to how do they engage with that space as a host? And
Yes.
and you have this wonderful hosting that you do on the podcast, and that I endeavor to do that here. And you were talking with Tennyson about the art of hosting, and I got into that vibe and art, and then okay, cool. I'm hearing how Dave and Tennyson were playing, remembering how he and I played, and it's really interesting. So getting into that vibe. And then, okay, so let my podcast player go to the next podcast, which and it's you and Junior in a
Yeah.
conversation. And
Yeah.
it's the one from I think it was released yesterday.
Yesterday. Yeah.
And I hadn't listened to all of it, but you immediately brought into the Ralph Stacey discussion
Yeah.
about complexity,
Mhm.
and I've got all sorts of stuff in my head about what is complexity and what's not.
Mhm.
And a friend of mine, Daniel Mesick, I don't know if Daniel, he taught me open space technology, and I brought that into my practice.
Mhm.
And Daniel says, "Hey, this Ralph Stacey guy really has something going on. I think he's really got this depth of complexity and how he is engaged with that."
Mhm.
And so I started reading this book that Daniel recommended, the complex responsive processes in
Yeah.
organizations.
Yeah.
So
It,
have you is in
that's
your
the book that I had suggested Dave read back when he was working on his dissertation. And you might hear as it goes on, he says, "This is after reading Stacy, I had to rip up a good part of my dissertation on because he was on autopoiesis, thinking that was the answer to how the interactions of people constitute social inaction. And my response as a father immediately was, "Oh no, did I do that? That cost us a whole other year."
this is so interesting because so Daniel offers me this book and I start reading it and up until that point, it was all about the work that I've engaged with in terms of organizational design. How do people interact as systems? Because each of us are complex because we are multivariate and just unpredictable, nonlinear, all this kind of stuff that we as human
Mhm.
beings are. And we together are in relationship. And the system is more about the relationships than it is about the individual parts, which is a part of what I have been introduced to in Russell
Mhm.
Akoff, that the
Oh yeah,
carburetor and the tires and all those things are all separate, but they only come together as a means of motion when they are in
when there's a
relationship to one
purpose.
another.
Yeah.
Exactly. And okay, so this systems thinking. And then I got to reading the Stacy book that this idea of the systemic structure around it is not really the game. It's the game in that is the relationship and the response and the process and how are you and I creating what is here and creating the sense that we are observing. I'm like,
That's right.
and then oh my gosh, does that just this is now do I even really want to think about systems thinking and
Oh,
complex
sure you
adaptive?
do.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, you do. But what you have to
oh,
also now is give credit to the conjecture that Dave and I have that, or maybe it's more than that for Dave because he earned a doctorate with it, but he basically says that system is created in our conversation. Awareness of a system is, hey, did you notice that we're talking on Zoom? And what does that then do in terms of our freedom to express each other?
mhm,
And so, oh, now we've brought in system awareness.
mhm,
There is, like everything else, something we've tagged as
yeah,
system, as organization, as president, all those tags. But they only matter in the moment when two or more people are having a conversation and it comes up as a
yeah.
necessity to pay attention to. Otherwise, it doesn't. It's a construct that's waiting to be discovered again and again and again. So as a teacher, I didn't teach system thinking. I taught thinking about systems. Very different because if you're not thinking about them, they're not going to have much influence on you. They can also smack you in the face when you're ignorant of the possibility that other people have accepted and agreed upon a systemic way of working. Now, if you don't care
Mm.
about that, you're going to get in trouble. So, oh, let me take my professor hat off. I'm listen. I'm just Dave. I'm just a country man sitting up here in northwestern Connecticut, loving having a nice conversation with a very interesting person. I
Not
am
in Connecticut.
Ryan Erickson. No, with you. You're in Cincinnati.
I am indeed in the great city of Cincinnati, which, as I didn't know, was home to Peter Block, who
Yeah.
I'd heard about from different places. And
Don't
it's
say
just,
just around the block either, because I'm sure he's heard that before.
oh my gosh.
The block.
Yeah. Oh, so this whole idea of creating the system as we are. So this also brings me back. I will get to, I want to get to practice too, but
Oh, you're already there. You just don't know you're talking about it yet.
this, when I was reading the book, I think one of the other conjectures that I shared from the On Practice as a Way of Being book recently, going really deeply into it, was this idea of don't hate the system, or don't hate the people,
Love the people.
love the people, hate the system, right?
Right.
That was Shell. What was Shell? I forget his.
It's something that Peter brought in to his thought practice, and then he brought it up to me. In a moment when I reached out to him years ago, when I had my first request to consult outside of my teaching role.
Hmm.
And I said, "What do I do?" He said, "First, find out if you love the people. And once you are in there, recognize that it's their system,
Yeah.
but you don't have to love it because it
Hmm.
may be getting them in trouble.
Yeah.
However, they have constructed in their conversational minds and hearts and deeds some kind of systemic way of going about their work.
Yeah.
That could be really tripping them up. And so, how do we change that? You have to care enough about the people that you want to get right through their defenses and have them say, in trust, I never knew why we did it X, Y, and Z way. I never
Yeah.
figured it out. And then you find out that it was because 20 years ago, some guy forced it into the system, and the way people accepted it is the way things
Hmm.
are done. And so it's fascinating to understand how people carry the system forward, and it could die if they never mention it again, whatever part of the system I'm talking about. But when they bring it up, it's reconnected, it's and it then governs behavior.
And playing, and again within the system, and it's interesting that's there that okay, so it emerges as a result of
Yep.
social norms that happen that have been learned and
Yep.
inculcated into this group of people who are a we in this place
Yep.
that okay, so this is, and the system has this almost this nefarious mode to it. It's like it's invisible, but it is this hand that is poking at you and driving you in this specific way. And and this, and when I talked about that, when I brought that quote up, one of my colleagues in the agile software development scrum space, who's a man of deep faith, and he said, be careful when you talk about the word hate. And I think you may have been a part of this conversation, and that he don't, you be careful that you don't hate that, because that's you're hating what people have created. And okay, maybe. But then after that, okay, so all right, Tobias. Tobias Mayer, wonderful guy. So I'll call him out here and he'll see this, maybe not. But so I got to thinking, and then I got to a recent book, the new book by Seth Godin, guy that I love and listen to a lot.
I'm
He's
jealous of him.
and he's and this new book is, and he goes into systems, and it's very much about, it's called This Is Strategy. And he talks about the system of, let's say, for example, water. That a lake is this body of water, is a but the river is different. The river is the system. The river moves and it has this motion to it.
I
And
get
that,
that.
yeah, and to navigate upon that, so that we as sailors, or we are in this boat on the system, that there's a game that's played within the system, that there are some explicit rules, some roles, goals, and
Mhm.
those artifacts, those components, that's what changes. That's what, oh, I can say that this rule and this process that guides me, like how I do this on the sailboat and do this, that, and the other, that those can be changed. And that as a result of changing those games, the system around it will change as a result.
Yeah.
Okay, man. So now we got systems, complexity, and games on top of it.
Yeah.
How, and sometimes that can get overwhelming to say, if I, as an individual in conversation with people, if I want a better to happen, right? If I want
Sure.
to to irritate authority in academia or an organization or some kind of whatever, poof, where do I make that choice to go and do it? And
I want to throw out an answer to that. Peter and I wrote about ways of being, practices, ways of being. Okay.
yeah,
But I think you start with ways of doing because we can see that. We can
yeah,
see that person in authority acting and interacting in such a way that it impairs ways of doing things rather than it celebrates and elevates ways of doing things.
mm,
And some people say, oh, culture, we got to do a lot about. I say again, look first at what people are doing
yeah,
and the way they're doing it, not just what they're doing, because you can only see that in a minute, but watch enough of their activity and their interactions. So you get a sense, okay.
mhm,
And in those further moments of observation, you become acutely interested in whether it's helping or hurting
mhm,
any human in the picture, customers, co-workers, the individual who's in the doing mode. Is it helping or hindering? Is it helping or hurting? Now I'm back to hate because
yeah,
frankly, if you're in there some consulting person and you see a lot more doing that leads to hurt,
yeah,
hate that.
yeah,
Don't hate the person, hate the what is continued to be perpetuated as people are changing anything but their mind on that particular factor. Now it's a conversation again. Did you notice that every time a customer comes in, you look down at your paperwork? I don't mean to be rude, but I've been sitting here waiting for my car, and I notice that every time someone comes up to your desk, you look immediately at your paperwork.
yeah,
And I have to tell you, that's a demotion of the person standing in front of you. Oh, I know. I never. I'm a very shy person, and I can't make eye contact right away. And I think someone put that person in a customer facing role
oof,
without
wow,
at least noticing before the customer does that this is not the place for them to be. They can sit behind someone who's very upbeat. Welcome to so and so Zubaru, but don't
mm,
put that person there because if their
yeah,
head stays down, then it stays down in other ways too. So
mm,
that's the difference. Was there a system that said the system put the person in that role and called it a role and all of the rest, which to me just wonderful pieces of vapor architecture.
yeah,
We're there,
conceptual
but if you
architecture,
really say, okay, show me a role, it goes poof, you can't show a role. Oh, here it
yeah,
is on the org chart. Oh, that's a role. Oh,
nope,
that's what the person is behaving accordingly by. It's bad grammar, but it helps us see that we're organized. We're organized on paper.
yeah,
Now come on out to our world, and which, by the way, is the practice world.
yeah,
Let's see how it's working in practice. And
ah,
that's what moved Peter from the beginning of his undergrad, even before his undergraduate days, and through his graduate days, and through his graduate days, and working with some of the original thinkers in organization behavior, like Fritz Rothberger.
wow,
They all said theory is great. We love to talk to theorist to theorist. It's
yeah,
fun. We can critique each other. But really, if it's not informing practice and informed by practice,
yeah.
then it's just a lovely garden to walk through and admire and sniff the flowers, but it's not
There,
affecting anything.
well,
Oh,
there are much more vulgar ways of describing that activity that happens in
of course,
a dark room in
of
the ivory
course,
tower.
of
Um,
course.
And I
And that
love that
that
this.
that tower, by the way, is something Peter Vale. I met him when he was not only my first OB teacher for my doctoral program, but he was associate dean
Hmm.
of the business school. And he had a very different personality than the dean, who was an accountant, and Peter wasn't. And so I noticed the contrast right away. And almost I walk into the dean's office and Mr. Fearon, and then I go over to Peter's office. Hey, Dave, how you doing? What's going on? With real interest in what's going on.
Care.
And see, there's the difference. All the way through from Peter's career, a wonderful teacher. He then became the dean of the School of Business and Government for George Washington, big school.
Hmm.
He never lost that. Let's find out what's really going on before we leap to
Mm.
providing a model, for example, something we talked about under the best practices that you cited.
Yeah.
He didn't have a problem with the fact that there were models that companies had worked out so they could show others their particular practice.
Hmm.
What he had problem with when someone would come in, grab the model, bring it out with the authority to push it down in to a human, nice, warm human organization, pushing
It's a
that model in
cage.
and saying, there, you're going to do it just like GE does it. And we'll be more like GE.
Yeah.
It, Peter's point was you have to think very deeply about what's really going on with people and who they are and what they will understand and won't understand. And then you can show them a model, but then you say, okay, let's take it to where it will work for us with our own model.
Yes.
If you need a
Oh,
model,
I-
and we do, we like, they keep
well,
us aware of what we've agreed upon.
sure. Yeah. And and it seems so ridiculous to have to say this, but context is everything. The context
Mhm.
of where you are geographically. If you are producing the exact same piece of equipment, right? So the widget X, right, is assembled. It has the same parts and all that stuff. If widget X is assembled here in Cincinnati, Ohio, it's going to be different. The processes and the ways of being and the ways of doing are going to be informed by each other when they're happening in Connecticut or
Yep.
in Shenzhen or whatever.
Mhm.
But the human organization that supports that is different, and the ways of getting the precision, complicated results are going to be different because you have different complexities of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and spirit beings,
Absolutely.
the random carbon units.
Way back
That
in the 90s, my friend and colleague Steve Cavallari and I boldly created and edited a book called Managing Organizations That Learn. And we had a lot of authors, co-authors for many chapters. And then he and I both wrote one or two chapters. And the chapter I wrote was called A Prismatic Management Mind, something I created to have a chapter. And I thought, oh God, now what have I done? I've created a model of the prismatic management mind. How it's activated by action itself, and then it takes it in, finds a process in the memory that comports with it. If you can't find it, you create one. Eventually, it goes to action. And in the meantime, there's something at the base of the prismatic mind called the self, and that
mm.
is emotion.
Hmm.
And if you put emotion into the prismatic mind, now it's not robotic. It's actually creating thoughts of happiness and threat and this and that and doing all that going on. Oh, crap. How am I going to show this in a chapter? So here's what I did in a nutshell, to your point. I created a character named Dana Gilbert, who was a machine operator, a very experienced machine operator in a changing company. And there was enough about the way things were working through the part of his cell that he was a little worried that somehow or another they lost the focus on quality.
Mm.
This, you get that sense that they wanted more flow through. They wanted more
Yeah.
SKAs in the bin. And fast was the way they were going to go. And this was before Agile. I didn't know about Agile back
Yeah.
then in
Hmm.
95. I had Dana notice that they had pushed another part into his cell to be worked on and moved through that looked almost exactly like the old part, but there was no identifier on it. It made it look different. His keen eye saw that was a slightly different casing, and maybe one of the little places where the next connector should go in had moved up a bit. But no one had even mentioned that there was a new part coming into the system. But
Hmm.
he notices it and he goes immediately to his supervisor and says, "Do you see this?" And he pulled it off. I didn't know. I didn't notice that. What can we do about it? Oh, we can't go back to engineering. There's a whole new person back there, and blah 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 blah. All should Dana says, should I just let it go through? Because eventually, when this reaches an installer, and it's going to be a big
A
problem.
disaster, yeah.
So anyway, I gave it a happy ending because it's only a chapter. Basically, his son was going out for a day of skiing, and he noticed that his son's friend came in with this really bright luminescent ski parker, and right away he thought, "Boy, you'll never miss that kid on the slope." Then he went back and said, "Couldn't we just treat this new part with just even a dot of a very, very luminescent so that it clearly stands out?" And that happened, and it was a happy ending. And he didn't get a bit of pay raise for that
Uh,
because that's the system. Anyway, let's go back to your questions because I could tell stories forever.
no, well, see, I'm the host here, Dave.
Oh,
So you can this is your riff. So
uh,
we set the stage here. The title of this, the theme of this episode is what is practice, right?
all
So,
right,
and I
let's
think you
get to
talked
that.
about, we're going there, and I want to go back a little bit and rewind to that. Um, the story you just told had me thinking so many things about authority and how you
Mhm.
can't talk to people because they've got
Mhm.
their stuff and all this kind of jazz. That if
Yeah.
what if all that there was all that stuff was blasted down and brought back together in a more human way. But that's I'm not going to talk about that. I would love to go into the whole you're talking about the ivory tower, right? This is
Mhm.
where the brightness is. We have the shining the bright light on our discussions about what management is and all these kinds of theories of management. But
Mhm.
the word that came to me is like it's like the dark matter. It was the dark matter of something else. It was the dark matter of management. What was the phrase? I love the dark matter thing.
Dark matter of practice. Practice is the dark, could be the dark matter in organizations.
In organizations.
If you think
Yes.
it's the space in the quantum world, it's the space where there is no space. And essentially it's what theoretically holds the universe together. And here we are thinking dark, that's couldn't possibly have any function in a universe. But indeed, dark is the force of the universe that holds
Mm.
everything in a moving systemic way, using that
Yeah.
word again. Yeah, but what Peter, I think, also would say about the dark of practice being the dark matter of organizations is it's done in the dark. It's when you look through the eyes of an upper level manager, CE something,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
C person, they don't see.
Hmm.
Isn't that a paradox? The
Well, they're
C
not individual
people,
contributors, they're
they don't
non-contributors.
see because to them, it's a workforce, it's a spreadsheet of numbers, it's head count, it's all those things. The actual human beings who are performing on a moment to moment basis are where it's leading to success or failure. And instead, they're looking to have some abstraction of that pulled out as a set of data findings
Hmm.
and put to them. Now, I have no problem with data findings, but particularly if they're looking at what their employees are saying about themselves in the work. Those important data, very important data. And John Hibbs Coefficient Company has come up with a brilliant survey of that. The problem is that if C people don't use those data to really open their eyes and see what's
Mm.
real
Mm.
about the organization behaving that they're counting on to make them the money, it's an awful thing. And so you've put very bright light on the dark matter of practicing people. And oh my goodness, look at that. Look at that Dana Gilbert person. Look what he just did to save a lot of problems for the company with that little dot of luminescent paint.
And so much is in that, that the doing, and we're talking about the systems of doing, and that Dana has the knowledge, Dana has the context, Dana has the information, Dana sees this part coming through
And he has,
the heart. And I think there's another, the discernment, right? How does Dana get that discernment?
yeah,
Because of the practice. I'm putting, and say what we will about what the factory work had been, and as opposed to how it's done in this siloed way, but and in this mode, like Dana understands that this particular variance is going
mhm,
to cause a systemic failure down the road.
absolutely, no question. He knows that.
Yeah. And what might be possible for the performance, however one might measure that, of an organization if each practitioner had the authority and responsibility and support of each other at a peer level to witness and discern and understand the system from what we are doing as practitioners in a group practice of ensembles and ensembles together, that the free flow of data and information and wisdom.
It's the space in the quantum world. It's the space where there is no space. And essentially it's what theoretically holds the universe together. And here we are thinking dark, that's couldn't possibly have any function in a universe. But indeed, dark is the force of the universe that holds
Mm.
everything in a moving systemic way, using that
Yeah.
word again. Yeah, but what Peter, I think, also would say about the dark of practice being the dark matter of organizations is it's done in the dark. It's when you look through the eyes of an upper level manager, CE something,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
C person, they don't see.
Hmm.
Isn't that a paradox? The
Well, they're
C
not
people,
individual contributors, they're
they don't
non-contributors.
see because to them, it's a workforce, it's a spreadsheet of numbers, it's head count, it's all those things. The actual human beings who are performing on a moment to moment basis are where it's leading to success or failure. And instead, they're looking to have some abstraction of that pulled out as a set of data findings
Hmm.
and put to them. Now, I have no problem with data findings, but particularly if they're looking at what their employees are saying about themselves in the work, those important data, very
Hmm.
important data. And John Hibbs Coefficient Company has come up with a brilliant survey of that. The problem is that if C people don't use those data to really open their eyes and see what's
Hmm.
real
Hmm.
about the organization behaving that they're counting on to make them the money, it's an awful thing. And so you've put very bright light on the dark matter of practicing people. And oh my goodness, look at that. Look at that Dana Gilbert person. Look what he just did to save a lot of problems for the company with that little dot of luminescent paint.
And that to me is, this is the art. This is the performing art, right? So
It
it's
is.
leadership as a performing art, right?
It
I
is.
mean, Peter was
So the
going there
other
too.
night when I was in Baltimore as a guest of my son and his wife Linda, they took me to the Peabody Institute and there
Mhm.
was a student concert, an ensemble orchestra. They all look so young, tremendously diverse by appearance.
Yeah.
And they played Egmont, I think was the name of it. Does that make it
Mm.
ring?
The
I'm
Egmont
not.
Overture, Beethoven. Yeah.
There you go. And so I sat in this small concert hall and I watched them all come in with a bringing and dragging their to warm up, which is chaos.
Yeah.
It's a sound of chaos. Tootly tootly. And then the conductor comes in, big and he just puts his hands up and there's silence.
Hmm.
Audience is silent,
Hmm.
orchestra is silent. His hands are up. All he had to do then was wave one hand with a small baton, whoop, like that, and this amazing first few chords came out. And I, I was toward the back row, and I sort of went way back in my chair. Wow! And it wasn't just the sound; it was a great sound, and it was quite loud as you're breaking into that Beethoven piece. But it was going from complete silence and
Hmm.
anticipation of the next moment when it finally happened. And then it just went wow like that. And then he went on through and played flawlessly. Every performer beautifully. Now, to the point, they all had the right music. They all had the
Yeah.
best instruments they
Mhm.
could get within their means. Blah blah blah. They were all ready to give us that moment.
Mm.
And if you messed with it, if you uh, changed one sheet of music for one chair as
Yeah.
a joke, believe me, it would not have the same effect on the listener and the performer. And you're in the music world, no matter what you are. You're a musician. You're a different kind of street musician because you're out here on our street talking about organizations and people,
Yeah.
but you have that musical sense. So you know that while everything was rehearsed and everything was right, anything could have happened. And it was by then the sheer desire of those individual performers to support each other by coming in at the right spot and having that oboe play exactly the right moment
Mhm.
that made them all feel at the end. I could see them at the end of it because they played
Yeah.
another after intermission. I saw them at the end of that first set though. And these young people were beaming
Yeah.
and reaching out to each other. And the audience was so responsive. They were just beaming because they had an experience of that music. It'll never be played the same way again by the same people.
Or witnessed the same way, even if it were
No,
recorded.
no. And I was sitting with my son and Linda and their friend Chris, and we walked out afterwards and I really looked at Dave and I said, "Oh, I'm so grateful that you brought me to this because we talked about something, doing something else. This was been so good for my spirit, and and it was good for them. They lost a mother, so they needed it too. So if that performance had not done for us what we needed, it would have been a little disappointing. But it did just
Yeah.
the opposite. That's practice.
Wow. Oh goodness, so much that and that there's so many moments that you're talking about there that there's the chaos of every
Mm.
person with each
Totally,
individual
totally, totally.
instrumentalist. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
tuning, they're warming up, they've rehearsed this stuff. Oh, so where's this hard part? Oh no, we're
Mm.
gonna play this whole thing. Yeah, it's this chaos, and then the convener, right?
There you
Then the
go.
convener
Yay
comes
for the
up
convener.
and okay, so this is your gathering, right? So there's the
Mhm.
sponsor of this or whatever. I don't know what name it, whatever it is, the conductor, that the focus is here. And then let us all focus on this piece of music that is going to happen, this embodiment of Beethoven's spirit from hundreds of years ago to
Yeah,
come in now to each of the 100 people in that orchestra. And that an orchestra piece it's a different animal than if that was three or four or five folks doing
yeah,
improvised jazz or
yeah.
whatever, or if it was
Different.
a couple people doing some kind of electronic or whatever. But that performance, 100 people together, that they need to be in sync. if they're all playing the same piece of music, they know the piece. If they had someone put a note in the wrong place, they've
They'd
rehearsed
know
it
it.
enough
See,
to
they'd be like
they
Dana Gilbert. They'd say, "Hey,
exactly.
that's not the right phrase. I know
Exactly.
that," and they would just like go past it, skip
And
over, and not let it influence the music. So
yeah,
that
but
even when it's supposed to be so right, so perfect, there are these very human moments where someone has to recognize within the 100 that there's something that needs to be adjusted, even
yeah.
slightly. Maybe I've got to get my volume up. And when the conductor's hand is moving up and down for different, now when he comes over, shh, quiet parts,
And
loud parts, those are all, where is there a little dial in a human musician where they can turn it up for loud and down for soft? No, it's all in their whole body. It's embodied what it means to play softly or to let it all out.
and I know the music in this way. The conductor knows it, and the
Yeah,
conductor can hear it in a different way than the sections can hear it. But
yeah,
they're listening to each other. They're listening to other sections. They're watching. I
absolutely.
mean, and this to me, this is all about the love, Dave.
There's a
It
lot of love in that.
is the love between the sections there, and they're loving the music. They're putting it out there. The audience is receiving it and witnessing it. This is performance. These are high performing teams, right? That gets back to the
Mhm.
when I first saw the name Peter Vale, what
Yeah,
was in one of the handouts that Dan
high
Mezek showed
performing
me,
teams.
high performing teams. And what was the thing there was mentioned, didn't mention the dark matter, but I think there was the word spirit was in there.
Oh, yeah. In fact, his last, next to the last book, our book on practice as a way of being the last, was spirited leadership. And he, when he found he was not going to be able to use his legs anymore, he wrote a memo, an email, and I have a copy of it. I think I might have included it in our digital book, where he basically said, now that basically all I have is my spirit
Mm.
to think and be with. Thank God for my spirit because I'm going to keep going. And that was his thing.
Mm.
I'm going to keep going. And the cellist in that orchestra has a string break on her bow. Let's assume that just in the middle of one of the very big, soaring away.
Mhm.
I watched one cellist, and her hand was moving so fast that it looked like a blur. But let's
Mhm.
say in that instant, a spring breaks.
Yeah.
She can still bow the cello, but if she became dispirited by that tiny little accidental thing, it would have shown up in the music. She simply would have kept her bow off the cello and let the other three cellists do their part, but the music would be different.
Yeah.
And so there is that point where you say, I'm going to just keep going and do my very best. Every individual has that choice moment to moment. I will point out that when we were going to start this conversation, this jam, it was going to be in Ryan's studio. And I had never seen that particular. I'm a Zoom guy, not I'll try anything, but Zoom seems to work for me. Anyway, it was looked like it was going to be a fascinating way of recording our conversation. We're putting it out live, but my microphone, like the cello string, would not work with that system. It works great with Zoom, but it would
Yeah.
not work with that system. It's a very standard mic. A lot of people have the Shure SHURE mic, but it was not going to work. So we could have said, that's it. Ryan immediately told his huge audience of live viewers, sorry, you're not going to get Dave Fearon live today. We'll come back in another recorded conversation. But then you said, try this, that. Dave, do you have Zoom? You have a really good level of Zoom? I said, yeah, I got the top of the line Zoom. On we come, zing, zang, Zoom. We're having a conversation that I really wanted to have. I wanted your audience and ultimately mine when I send this link to it. I want them to know that there are two people on the screen right now. There is no big bag of money waiting to reward us for this conversation. And I've admired that with you. You're doing it because it's enjoyable and you're getting responses. People are commenting, You're getting some conversation. And why the hell do we care about anything that we're not getting paid for?
Yeah.
I'll
Oof.
tell you why. Spirit. That's why. Spirit. That's and
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
I've had a huge setback in my life when I never hoped for to be alive for, which is the loss of my wife Connie, who loved me. I loved her since the fifth grade, but she discovered me and allowed me to be in love with her in high school. So we knew each other a long time, a
Mhm.
long, long time. And I, when it happened in August that we're no longer going to be together, I had a moment where I thought, I did all these things that I enjoyed doing, the podcast and working on a book and everything, and it took time away from her. And I can sit here and regret the hell out of that. And then I thought, but she knew there's no way you can hold a teacher down. You
A free
can't,
range
I mean,
teacher. Yeah.
I'm a free range teacher. She knew it and she laughed about it. She did say from time to time, do you have enough episodes now to get it out of your system? And I said, just one more and then we'll see what baloney. It, I will go back to having more episodes. And
Mhm.
in the meantime, I had a chance to reprise a lot of the episodes that Peter and I had. And that's for anyone who's really trying to understand what the elders of our world, like Carol Golick talks about, what they sounded like. Again, at the spirit level, because Peter was not being paid for the podcast, and he was at the end, really at the end of his days. He still cared, and he worked out his thoughts on mic 22 times. And in fact, when we were arranging for the April, who he loved now, our new practice of bringing in guests, he was saying, "Who are we going to get? Who are we going to bring in? You got to get Catherine Kaplan. You've got to get Fred Miller. You've got to get so and so." And people I at that point had never heard of. Well, like, how am I going to find them? Well, you'll find them. Just find them. I want to talk. I want us to have a conversation with them. And the next day he died when he was
Oh
telling
my
me that on the
gosh.
phone. The next day he died.
Wow.
So that's spirit. That's why the interest in practice for me is giving me as a teacher something about which to learn and teach. If I only wanted to tell people what I knew about practice from a book or theoretical level, there would be hardly any audience for that. But to engage people, and we're doing, like we've done on author jams, and we've done on some of these workshops. If I'm in a breakout room with two other people I've never met, we got 10 minutes, usually 10 minutes, right?
I would
Yeah,
need
and
more.
come out with some kind of profound answer or question.
Yeah.
In those 10 minutes, though, because I need to learn before I can teach any more about practice, I want to hear what they do.
Yeah.
What do you do that you love? And it usually comes
Mm.
up in self introductions. I'm so and so from Japan. Da What I really love about this workshop is I do this to this. Okay, great. Now we got a beginning of what ultimately, for in many cases, became a podcast episode for me because I met quite a few people in those breakout groups over the
Hmm.
years, and I said, "Hey, I
Yeah.
love to see if you don't have anything to offer, then it's just nice to make your acquaintance.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to know you because I'd love to show other people what you do and why that's what you're doing now with your work and bringing us out to people. This is, to me, the new way to, it's not just branding. Branding, yeah, branding myself on social media. It's because we got so damn lonely during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Couldn't go even to the ivory tower, which you want to talk about, and I'm not watching your time. That it was just so much fun to just see people in little squares and hey, say, hey, I exist.
I mean,
So
this it would honor me so much to have more Dave and more jamming and play throughout many episodes. And maybe
I'm up for
what's
it.
next, what's um the end of or the last chapter of the book was a what's next. And I think that there's a what's next for the book and the digital book and how that came. And there's also a what's now for you that you said that you're refocusing. So there's that's in the room, the what's next for the books in the room. And we were talking about OD and complexity. And the way I usually end is with something I call a dangerous conversation, right? What is a dangerous conversation that you would like to see happen in the, let's say, the domain of academia, that this conversation is not happening, and I really wish it would, because it would create progress. It would create the better in the world that I think is missing. Because a conversation that's not happening, there's some risk to it. That presents some reputational risk or
Oh,
something.
a lot of risk. The the life of a tenured full professor, which I got to enjoy for the last part of my 30 years at this last institution, I looked at everyone else and how absolutely temporary was their work opportunity. Everyone else
Mm.
in a coffee shop, in my IT department, everyone who wasn't a tenured full professor, including assistants and associate professors who might not get tenure, was just in that risk zone. And
Mm.
so my thought was, look, we who have the privilege of this seemingly secure status ought to have a very profound and thoughtful voice in the way decisions are made for this institution. Whoever sits in the presidents and the vice president, provosts, and all those chairs, they need to hear from us because they're in temporary jobs. Their jobs are temporary too. And they're going to make decisions in that temporary state, whether they care to anyone else to know or not, to keep themselves employed. So when they have decisions to make, they have to think, what's this going to do to what if I get canned for taking this bold stand? I could have the same decision in front of me for the institution. And I could say, let's think it through. Let's see where it's all going to go. Let's learn. And then, and I'll put my name on whatever we conclude together is the best course of action. I'll put my name on that. What can they do? They can yell and
Mhm.
scream at me. But this has all changed, Ryan. Even the full professors with tenure in most of the higher ed institutions in this country are in a very temporary status.
Mm.
The whole college is temporary now.
Wow.
Whole colleges have closed in the last couple of 3 years. Entire
Mm.
colleges with 100-year histories done, closed. Last student graduated, done. Why
Mm.
is that happening? And I think the dangerous answer to that is we've lost the reason to be. We've
Mm.
lost the reason why we have a cloistered campus, why we have an ivory tower. It is so that there can be freedom of thought and expression and exploration, failures and successes like nowhere else in the real world. This is
Mm.
where we should all be as human as possible. And what do they do? But they start canceling the humanities programs and throwing the faculty out. And I'm in a business school, and uh, I'm a Lorax speaking for the trees in a business school. The trees being, hey, we're talking about humans, not employees. We're talking
Yeah.
about the complexity of human life as experienced every day in and out of a company. So let's stop with the cliches. Let's stop with the spreadsheets. Those only tell us so much. Don't push us out of the business school, which, by the way, is happening. They're
Yeah.
pushing organization types out of the business schools and putting them in the ed school. Okay, that's fine. to a point, but no business students are going to be taking classes with us now. And ed students don't, they have so much other theory about humans that what can we show them? So those are the things that are going wrong. You would
Mm.
not do those separations and those class in those siloings, and also if you had any idea why you were there as an institution, it would
Mm.
be very different. And most of us, in the 1,000 people who were in my faculty in that university, would have come to know each other. We would bump into each other. We'd have great conversations. We would be moving our students back and forth among us in order for our students to get the insights that they sought. We would not be capturing them in our classes alone. It would be a free range place for a
Mm.
free range teacher.
Yeah,
So there's my vision.
sounds better to me. Open space education, right?
They were so glad when I
Um,
retired. I was such a curmudgeon toward the end.
so what I typically do at the end of the dangerous conversation, I say, now we can talk for however long we want. And I don't know if I have my client needs me at a meeting, maybe I don't know, but this idea of being at the fringe, I think we've talked about it before in
Oh
the
yeah.
author jam, and that there are folks who, again, because as you're saying that for in
Oh
the
yeah.
author jam, and that place of the business school that lives at the edge of the
Mm.
quantitative, and that when you move to the
The quants.
qualitative, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then
The
the
quals and the
qualitative
quants.
folk, the softies, and
Hmm.
that doesn't really, that doesn't create the results, but
That's not business.
that's not business. What and this is what is an organization anyway?
Yeah,
What is
but
being organized? Human
people.
beings
Yeah.
who have, and I can never ever, and with the technology that we have today, I cannot know what's in your head or in your
Mhm.
heart. I can only trust what you say, and I can only know how you make me feel from how we interact, and
Yeah.
trust. And this is what I think is that we're the we that are folks who attempt to create change in the world. The word we is I've got issues with it, but
Yeah.
the idea of a loss of respect for the human dignity of the
Hmm.
other, right? I
There you
am
go.
not going to harm you. I respect that you are a human being with infinite beauty inside of you, and
Yeah.
I wish to engage in that. And I am not going to threaten you. I am not going to harm you. I want to know you.
Yeah.
And this comes back to a practice, and I think I'm going to bring this all the way around to tennyson again,
Hmm.
because when we talked there were a couple words. I talk about togethering, not this othering. I talk about the
Hmm.
togethering,
Hmm.
and he brought into this idea of humaning.
Yeah, I
That
remember that.
what is it? So there's humaning and togethering, and that those are
Yeah,
practices that create those organizational bonds, that we are
exactly.
togethering to do humaning together.
That's what it is, man. That's what it is. It's funny because it's crossed my mind that if you really want to know what an artificial intelligent instrument is like inside, you can open it up and you can read the code. You can read the algorithms. It's all there. You can see every scintilla of why that thing performs the way it's performing if you can read the code.
Yeah.
Can't do that with a human. If you
No.
open us up, you can't begin to find our code. And that's what's amazing. And it really is frustrating to people who want to pin humans down, like marketing types or the people doing polling to try to tell the candidates what to say next. They all want to know what makes us tick. They want to know if there's some way that they can open us up and find out what's going to make us behave the way they want us to behave. And what's marvelous, and back to my whole point about the tenured full professor experience that I had, is they can try, but I'm still here. I'm still me. I'm going to keep doing what I do. And if I can't do it here, I'll find someone else, where else, where I can express myself. That kind of will versus a piece of AR architecture is where I think the battle lines are drawn. Now, who's fighting? I'm fighting for resources for humans because I can see billions now moving in to creating more and more artificial types of human behavior. Billions are going that way.
Yeah.
I'm seeing schools closing because they don't have the funds from their states or from their benefactors anymore to stay doing what they can do for human intelligence.
Mm.
That's the battle line that I'm worried about. So there you go. I guess I got to stay alive and keep fighting, huh?
I would again to respect what you've seen and you eh, that it is heartening for me to see that you've seen the change, that you have witnessed the dehumanizing of an institution writ large of the educational
Yeah,
institution, the educational industrial complex, whatever you want to call it.
yeah.
And Steve Cady, who sponsors many of the spaces that
Hmm.
we play in,
Hmm.
talks about that industrialization that is just accelerating. That there must be a place to say no. Okay, let's show some space. Let's open some space between that avalanche of mechanisms and this little breath of life in there.
But
Oh.
here it is. Here's the space, Brian. You were free and are free to create this jam and other things you're doing using technology. And you can invite me into that space and
Mm.
we can do just what we've done a little longer than I'm sure you can edit this into two parts. But this is exactly why I'm here. It's exactly why I'm I'm going to keep appearing in a social media world because this space gives me a place to express myself freely.
Mm.
And people can take it or leave it. It has no bearing on my mood. I just had love getting that conversation recorded with my son Dave last
Yeah.
week, sitting in that lovely park, listening to that wonderful mind of his working. And I was happy to put it up there, and I'll keep reinforcing it this week because I can and you
Yeah.
can. And this is the space. And if it's also a space where serious thought is happening and important ideas can be discovered. And then we reinforce them on LinkedIn with comments and chats. This is a happening space. I can tell you there's some academics sitting back there. Their minds have been going and they've been writing stuff down, but they're thinking, Jesus, no one's paying any attention to my thoughts. Maybe I have to
Mm.
die and have someone find me later on in the literature in order to exist.
Mm.
And there's a couple of us in our field who say, oh, they're having a lot of fun on LinkedIn. I'm going to get up there too. And so you got people doing very few out of the thousands of academics in my field are actually putting some time into being available to the thought world writ
Mm.
large above the line of published research. And
Mm.
of course, they're not getting any recognition for it. In fact, they might even be dinged for it
Mm.
because you should have produced two more referee journals with the time it took you to do that thing you do every your podcast every week. They're bringing great attention and glory to their institutions that those schools never would otherwise get, and yet that old clamp of called the Promotion and Tenure Project would squeeze shut any of that expressing that they do in order to learn. They do it in order to get feedback. So here we
Mm.
are at the end of your time, plus more.
Yeah.
You know now that you can just ask one question and I'll talk for 59 for 90 minutes.
Uh, It's a pleasure for me to host you here, Dave. And
Thank you.
did I talk too much? Did I not let
No, no.
Dave talk much? So the typical thing that happens at the end of these shows, how do people find you? How do you want them to find you?
Yeah.
What are you doing next? Another book maybe
Well,
I can help you with, or
oh
what?
God, no. I'm 80, almost 82. No more book, but certainly want people to find on practice as a way of being because it's very relevant. And soon, the same publisher, my library, Theo Ford Stigler, will be finishing digitizing a book that I wrote with Steve Cavallari in 2006 called Inside Knowledge. That's going to be digitized and made available next to
Mm.
my other book. And that is where, by the way, my whole novel that I wrote in order to explicate the nature of pragmatics and pragmatism is Dana Gilbert. But now Dana Gilbert is a woman in a call center. And when I
Beautiful.
created the Dana Gilbert at a hospital where I was in residence for a couple of years as a business professor, Dana Gilbert was a male nurse. So maybe my next thing will be in another setting with more Dana Gilberts, but that's where my heart is, with the people who do the work day in and day out, and who without whom we would all be really screwed.
Wonderful. Dave, thank
You
you
can
so
find me
much
on
for,
LinkedIn, Facebook, and anywhere else where your podcasts are found.
and I tag Dave all the time and stuff that I put out there that I
Thank
want.
you.
And you're wonderful about coming in and playing with folks.
And
And who
everything we have now is on in a YouTube channel, I should call it.
yes.
The Wait a Minutes that I've been doing every Friday, those are all there. Thanks to Nathan Featherston.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Find me and then tell me that you found me, and we'll have a conversation.
And play. Great. So the URL linktr.ee/your practice. And I had that as a little banner on the
Yeah,
end that I
that's
was
my
gonna
treat. Yeah.
that's the link tr.slash your practice is how to get a hold of Dave. So
Yep.
thank you so much, Dave. Thank you out there for the precious gift of your time and attention. And I'm going to spend a couple moments with Dave plotting what might happen next. So until next time, be well, be more purple, and make some great music.